So hello everybody, and a very warm welcome to you all back to the third and final day of this year's Sub-Sahara Spectrum Management Conference. We've had two fantastic days of discussion so far and covered some really diverse issues. And I think we were just looking at the figures, and I think more than 450 of you in total have tuned in across the 2 days so far. And that's just on the platform itself. Of course, we're also going live on Twitter and YouTube, and I'm sure many more of you have been tuning in that way as well. So really do appreciate all of you for joining us for those first 2 days, and of course, to be being back with us here for today's third day. We have another fantastic lineup of sessions and some really interesting topics we're going to be covering today. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that in a second. Before I do, I just wanted to have a quick recap on something from yesterday, because yesterday we actually were talking primarily on WRC23 and some of the key issues of WRC23. So across the day, we had a poll running, which was to see what everyone thought was the most prominent issue ahead of WRC23, and I maybe wanted to give you the results of that. We did announce the results of that last night, but I wanted to just, for those of you who maybe weren't there then, to recap on that. So we asked, as I said, what the attendees at the event yesterday expected to be the most prominent issue at WRC23, and you can see the results there. So we've got as a comparison the results that we had last year at last year's conference on the right-hand column, and the results from yesterday, well, it says today, but the results from yesterday are in the column in the middle there. So we can see that there's been a slight shift from last year to people who think that the revision of the UHF band is going to be the most prominent issue at WRC23 for the region. But there's still three clear issues that people see as being those which are going to be the most prominent, as I say, and that's the 3.3 to 3.8, the C band, the 6 gigahertz, and the UHF band. So that's just a quick recap of the findings of that poll that we had running yesterday. And thank you to everyone who participated in that. So on to today. So today's session, we're going to be looking at continuing the discussion on some of the key issues around spectrum management in the region. We're going to be starting very shortly with our session, which is looking at continuing the path towards the harmonized continental 5G strategy. And that session is going to be something that is actually kind of continuing from a session that we've had in the last few years, looking at similar issues in that event. So it's been an ongoing discussion that we've had, and we're really looking forward to continuing that shortly. We then have our next showcase session before we move on to look at millimeter wave spectrum, and then finally to the evolving shape of the spectrum landscape in Africa. So another very busy day ahead of us, and really looking forward to hearing all of those issues. So to get started, maybe what I can do is to pass over to our moderator for this morning's session, who can give us a lot more information about what we're going to be covering. And that is Elizabeth Migwala from Qualcomm. So Elizabeth, welcome. Great to have you with us. And as I said, this is a session that we've kind of almost been continuing for the last few years. And it's been almost seen the journey towards kind of 5G and what's been happening in that area. So really looking forward to this today, to hear the progress and the current update on what's happening. So without further ado, I will pass over to yourself. And as I said, looking forward to the session.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Dan, and good morning, everybody. It is my greatest pleasure and privilege to moderate this session. For those of you who have been with us in the SSA Spectrum Management Conference over the last so many years, you will realize that we've had a standing session every last morning of the conference. And this has been dedicated to exploring how we could approach a harmonized continental strategy for 5G deployment and uptake in Africa. So from really small beginnings, starting with awareness, sensitization in many informal and brainstorming sessions and workshops. But this session in this year is a little different because the conversation has taken a more formal status, as was mentioned by Secretary General John Omo in his opening address on Tuesday. So under AUC and ATU coordination, the task group on emerging technologies undertook a multi-stakeholder exercise, which generated a set of recommendations aimed at catalyzing implementation of IMT 2020 or 5G. We use those words interchangeably. So this morning, we have something really interesting for you. We will start with a presentation of the highlights of the work and the outcomes of the task group, from none other than the distinguished rapporteur of Section 1 that worked on 5G. That will be Engineer Mohamed Omer, Head of Terrestrial Services and Telecommunication in Sudan. Thereafter, we will hear perspectives and views from a panel which has been constituted to represent the key constituencies. Namely, if we're talking policy making at national and global level, represented by Daniel Obam, who is the Communications Secretary in Kenya, and also the chair of ITU RAG. And when Dan is done with policy, it will go for some serious regulatory attention of Tsokanetso Kepaletswe, who is the CTO of Botswana Communications Regulatory Authority. And if ever there was a seasoned regulator in the continent, Tsokanetso is he. And who said that 5G is an all-sufficient, all-encompassing standalone? You need backhaul, and you need to be able to reach the hard-to-reach places. Who better than satellite to do that, right? And so ESOA is at hand, represented by Laura Roberti from ESOA. And finally, and there are no prizes for figuring out where users go when they want to subscribe for their 5G services. So James Maitai, the network director of Safaricom, will have the final say on that. And finally, before I hand over the floor to our first speaker, I know that this is a Spectrum conference, and all of us here are proficient and fluent in the one common language that we all understand. And I call that language Spectrumese. We speak Spectrumese very well, and we all understand it very well. But for the final 5 minutes of this session, I want to request the panelists and I want to request the audience to change to English so that we can speak to people who are not in this session, who don't understand Spectrumese, and generate and articulate just one single tangible follow-on action from our session. And with that, I want to introduce our first speaker, Mohamed. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, and good morning for all of you distinguished delegates. And thank you, Elizabeth, for this introduction. Actually, Dan, I see that you start to display my presentation. I have a lot of slides, but I'm going to make myself as very quickly as possible. So then if you go to, so this presentation actually is extracted from the main document speak about or give recommendation toward implementation of IMT or 5G IMT 2020 in Africa. So if we go to the content of this presentation, there will be introduction of the opportunities of 5G IMT 2020 in Africa. The second section, which includes definition about what's the IMT and the potential case that can be used in example in Africa, example of those use cases. The economic contribution of 5G in Africa continent also is here with us. So we are going to see the policies, the regulation, action to support the 5G too. So we will see the adaptation of those policies and spectrum policies, those policies which is especially for the spectrum, and we will see the wide Africa-wide actions that need to be taken to facilitate the deployment. We will have a look to the main standardizations that we consider in this recommendation, and we will see example of 5G deployment, or especially in millimetric wave in around the world. This could be a good guideline for African countries, African member states. So then if you just go down, so in this introduction, actually we know that 5G is not just wireless technology; it's convergence between the wireless and actually the cloud computing, for example, and other technologies. It is a new paradigm, and it is will connect everything to be smart. And there are many relevant many applications that maybe can be relevant to Africa in the field of communication, in field of agriculture, in fields of education, in a lot of sector actually. And we know that connectivity is a key factor for success of any achieving digital economy. We think that the COVID-19 is very good example for this. Now everyone is looking for the broadband and connectivity. So that there are two main issues in order to achieve this connectivity and this broadband affordability. Actually, if enough spectrum operator is very important in all bands. And the second thing is that supportive policies that to support this deployment with low taxation. If you go, done. Okay. So we think that 5G is a new enabler of broadband in 5G in Africa. So the need for the broadband is very well known in Africa, and there is no question about this. And the mobile operators actually will keep playing very good role in delivering the connectivity and broadband, and the broadband is still growing very, very rapidly. And the lack of infrastructure or lack of or the high cost of ruling out the fiber to home, this kind of infrastructure actually is issue in Africa. But as a compensation for this, we see that fixed wireless access can play a very good role, and still this fixed wireless access can be used and still be used by a lot of operators around the world to carry the traffic of 4G of LTE. So we think that 5G IMT fixed wireless access can play a very, very good role to mitigate the risk of or the digital the digital dive in Africa. It can bring the connectivity in cities, in rural areas, and solve the issues of broadband and availability of connectivity. So if we go down to okay, so we have main elements for consideration actually in this presentation. We know that actually there are a lot of vast diversity of application can be used through the 5G IMT20, and it is not just only to meet the current market demand, but also it can go further to create like new business model, new service, and improve new service, new industries actually. So this could lead actually to new business model, and this could lead also to level of cost saving and energy efficiency. Actually, we know that ITU have adopted several or three scenarios for deploying of 5G, or as an example of 5G network. I think this is very common and very known that the first is enhanced mobile broadband, the massive machine type communications, ultra reliable low latency communication. All these scenarios are adopted by the ITU in order to classify the kind of scenarios that, but all these scenarios are applicable and are, can be used in Africa as a use case. So Dan, if you we see here a figure which illustrates scenarios adopted by ITU. And then if you can skip this. Yes, there are so many advantages. Technically, there are so many advantages of 5G IMT 2020 over the current IMT advance in terms of big data rate, in terms of capacity, in terms of spectral efficiency, in terms of delay. It is so that's why we should move toward 5G in Africa. So there is no question about the quality and the development of all those parameters in Africa compared to all those parameters of 5G compared to the previous version of IMT. So Dan, if you could just move. Okay, so the next slide, please. Okay, IMT 2020 use case relevant to Africa. Actually, the majority of the internet access in Africa is still run by the mobile operators, and this may be because of the difficulties of the making any penetration in the fixed broadband. So we see there are growth in the broadband and there are growth in the fixed wireless access. Actually, 5G can support both, so that's why 5G should be recommended to use in Africa, because it can support both the mobile broadband and fixed wireless access. So here, if we, Dan, you can go to the next slide, please, Dan. Yeah, we have here application and use cases examples along application alongside with the use cases. For example, in communication, in agriculture, in healthcare. All those examples can be used in Africa. They are. Elizabeth, do you would like to say something to comment?
Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you very much. I'm going to call him Mr. Chairman. Yes, I see Dan has brought me back on the screen, which means he's pushing me for time. So maybe what we will do, I think, for the audience, we have Engineer Omar's presentation is really comprehensive, and he has actually captured the entire deliberations that we had, and you will have that on for your reference. But I think perhaps what I'm going to ask Dan to do and Engineer Omar to do is to go to the recommendations. If we can go to the slides at the end that talk about the recommendations, then maybe in the last 2 or so minutes, then the audience can have the flavor of the recommendations, which is going to be for the discussions. Sorry about that. So maybe you can run through the recommendations, maybe just quickly, then the audience, we can have our panel unpack it, if you don't mind. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth, for your advice. Yeah. So now we can go to recommendation. Okay. So if we go to the first recommendation, actually I have 5 minutes. So it is up to, we have to define and agree under the supervision of African Union, actually, a roadmap. It is very important to create a roadmap and timeline to achieve the coordinated and harmonized regional 5G IMT 2020 deployment. It is very important to conduct this timeline, and we have to review the national regulatory framework by 2022 and develop a 5 years national plan or roadmap that can release and licensing of a spectrum for IMT. The 5 year spectrum roadmap should aim at maximizing the socio-economic benefit so that all countries should make their spectrum, which now is used by IMT, is make it ready for the 5G deployment. And even those spectrum which is not yet be freed or refarmed to be used for 5G, they should do this very, very quickly by 2022. Adoption of regional harmonized frequency, and we should start with 3.3 to 3 millimetric wave application, and we have to assign spectrum for operators in low and high band to serve the purpose of coverage and capacity and building penetration. And this we should consider the amount of spectrum. For example, in 3.3 to 3.6, we should consider the allocation of spectrum 80 to 100 megahertz per operator and 800 to 1000 megahertz per operator in 26 gigahertz band. So the issue of sharing licensing exempt spectrum is very important and should be considered, and prioritization of the traffic on the spectrum is very important thing that also has to be conducted by the regulator. So ensuring the synchronization and the using of TDD network recommendation to achieve the flexibility for the network by using this type of frame structure. Considers flexibility for local user wanted to use those URLLC service. Review the real need for spectrum caps in order to prevent the operator from getting enough spectrum, especially for adaptation of millimetric wave. So regulators should take advantage of opportunities of the market-oriented scenarios and policies and make through the targeted policies is the overall licensing process. Uphold comprehensive, secure, and transparent privacy. The issues of privacy should take care of this, because we have a lot of networks in 5G, a lot of users, a lot of cases. So each users, they have their privacy needs, privacy requirements. So we should balance between the shared privacy and the protecting of personal data and corporate data. So allowing operators to use network silencing to increase the efficient use of spectrum. Implement standard, that is ITU and 3GPP or relevant standard, and we should fall in line with those standards in order to create the harmonization and right development, healthy development of the 5G. Communicate and open discussion about the safety of the 5G on public, and reassure people about the safety and the guidelines which related to the international bodies about the safety of the 5G, and to reassure people about this issue about the radiation of 5G. Consider reduction of taxation to in broadband and internet to able users, consumers, to actually buy equipment in order to get access to the network and the 5G service. Establish a standard and simple one-stop shop in order to save the process of approval for new sites, for licensing, for example, licensing from the aviation, from the environmental authorities. All this are very needed action, very necessary action needed in order to.
Sorry, Mohammed, I'm sorry to jump in. There seems to be a few issues with the connection, and I'm not sure if it's the same for everyone else, but we keep losing you a little bit. So I don't know. I think it's great to see all of the recommendations. I don't know whether what did you think, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I think we can. Have you got one more page? Is that the last one?
Yes, I have only one page. One more page, Elizabeth.
So I think
I need less than 5 minutes. Maybe.
No, we only have. I think Dan is pushing us. So I think what we can say though, and I think the whole idea was to give a snapshot of the recommendations, and it's something we'll discuss for a while, but sufficient to say that the task group generated 23 recommendations, and that this has been validated through a forum by policymakers from the continent. And I think what we really wanted was that flavor to set the stage for the panelists. So I think we can leave it at that. The recommendations are available for the audience. They can look through them. And I think maybe if Dan can bring through the panelists, so they can somehow react to the recommendations, etc., and have you, Engineer Omer, available when we come back for questions and answers. Maybe we can provide more on it, just because of technology. But thank you for the snapshot and for the presentations, and you'll join us on the panel. Thank you very much. Sorry about the technology. And so if we can go straight to the panelists, please, Dan, and give the floor straight to Daniel Obam from Kenya. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Dan and Engineer Mayor for that presentation. Let me just start by thanking From Global for this opportunity again to have this discussion. I think it's important for us to continue discussing the issue of 5G so that we can move from the spectrum issues to actual reality of deployment. So my presentation is based on a reaction of the recommendations from the team, which in full disclosure, I must say that I was part of the larger group that was involved in the development of this recommendation. But on reflection now, I have some few comments I want to make about the recommendation. Next slide, please. So for me, other than the recommendations, also I want to bring in the issue of what we are trying to do on the continent, the issue of the digital economy, of which one of the pillars, as you may recall, Kenya helped develop the digital economy blueprint for Africa, which supports the effort of the Africa continental free trade area. And in the infrastructure is a pillar. And also the digital transformation strategy for Africa says that by 2030, on the continent, we should have a speed of at least 6 megabits per second, anywhere, everywhere at an affordable price, through a smart device manufactured in Africa, and so on and so forth. So if you are going to have ubiquitous coverage, then 5G offers the opportunity to meet these policy objectives. But as we know, normally our MNOs and our own MNO Safaricom is represented here. Their objectives sometimes are not really aligned with the policy objectives. We may say we want these speeds everywhere, but investing in 5G is very expensive. So there's a need to align or to find a win-win for both the MNOs and the policy objectives. So what I'm proposing is that with these recommendations now, the next stage would be for us as policymakers, together with our national regulatory authorities, look for ways of incentivizing MNOs to achieve this extensive coverage that the policy at the continental level is talking about, and also where the digital economy blueprint talks about connectivity platforms towards achieving a single digital market for Africa. Next slide, please. Secondly, the recommendations of pick out some of the use cases, as Mohammed has said, education, health, public safety. But I would like to perhaps propose further that other than government incentivizing operators, perhaps we need to, as governments, identify and even participate in identifying use cases that can deliver government-related services. One of the pillars for the digital economy blueprint is digital government, where we want to enhance delivery of government services. So perhaps other than just the policy and regulatory interventions at a superficial level, we could go in and identify use cases that can help support deployment of 5G so that we can enhance the MNO's ability to offer these services. Another identified weakness in the recommendation was the issue of backhaul, and you talked about backhaul. So again, we are proposing that as we've done in Kenya, we've invested in a national backbone to all extensively through the country. So perhaps this will be one way of reducing the cost to the MNOs by investing in backhaul fiber, so that this can accelerate the deployment of 5G. I noticed also, based on the recommendation, that the priority bands that we are recommending is 3.3, 3.4 to 3.6 megahertz band. But as we all know, in many African countries, this band is fragmented because it was allocated to fixed wireless access in analog. And so when we identify this band, is it really practical to expect this band to be used? So we are recommending that the defragmentation of this band needs to be a topic of discussion if it's going to be a priority band. And I don't know how easy it will be. My proposal that perhaps it's not a single country effort, but if we do this at continental level to try and see how we can create a huge swaths of spectrum. The recommendation talk about 80 meg to 100 meg for 5G in this band. But if the band, you can hardly raise 20 megahertz or 10 megahertz, then we really need to take some action to reorganize the whole band and make it available for allocation for 5G. This could be done by either moving those who are in this band, the incumbents, to a different band, a different location, or they say money can buy almost everything, but not happiness. Maybe consider just financial incentives to clear the band. We need to clear the priority band, or perhaps this is where the discussion about looking for other priority bands come in, and it may not be this particular band, could be above the band here, could be alternative bands that have been identified already for 5G. Lastly, the last slide. The next slide, please. Yeah, so what we're doing, also we need to do some cross-border frequency coordination measures other than doing bilateral measures. If you're a country with 5 neighbors, instead of doing 5 different bilaterals, if we could have a harmonized way of actually coordinating our cross-border frequency matters, it will help enhance the deployment of 5G. I want to leave you the last slide, which depicts what has happened up to last year with the digital dividend 1 and digital dividend 2. These have been around for a long time, but you'd be surprised that in the 700 megahertz band, only 20 countries have have switched off analog TV, and 28 countries in 800. And so 28 countries haven't switched off. So the band was allocated for digital dividend 2 was allocated mobile in 2015, but up to now we've not cleared the band. So it's important that even as we look for more spectrum, we need to go in and make sure that the spectrum is actually allocated, is cleared for use, and assigned so that 5G services can be deployed. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. Dan Obam does not disappoint. And so here is where basically the message is recommendations are good, but they have implications. And I think we begin to delve into them in a little bit more detail, and we realize that behind every one of those 23 recommendations are implications. They say that once the policymaker has made the policy, he hands it over to the regulator to implement. So over to you, Mr. Kepaletswe. Can you implement these recommendations for us? The floor is yours.
Moderator, and I think it is a difficult task. And this issue of 5G coming up, I think we have had the discussion. I did participate on the 4th Management Conference, and I did highlight that it's very, very important that Africa, implement 5G. It address its concept. It did not just buy a Ferrari because our neighbor has a Ferrari. And I still emphasize that it's very, very important that these recommendations address the Africa problem, and we do benefit from the rollout of the 5G. And that is very, very key. And my highlight on these slides, it will be basically highlighting some of the things which we have to do in order to make sure that we do get the benefit. The next slide. On my slide here, one of the things which I wanted to highlight is when we develop a harmonized strategy for 5G Africa, which Dan has just highlighted, we need to take into account the Africa Digital Transformation Strategy. So that is, we do put it in, take recommendations so that there is the harmony between that. And the issue of the digital infrastructure, we need to debate among ourselves. What do we need 5G for? Is it going to be a national deployment throughout the whole country? Or are we looking to address different niche problem areas? Or we can adopt another model of, heavier wholesale infrastructure where it's shared by various multiple operators in order to reduce the cost. And the issue of device accessibility. Those are some of the challenges which we know and the cost of affording those, we need to address. From a perspective, there are various challenges which I do see, and some of the things which I'll talk more about is, of course, on the issues of the environment. The key band which has been identified in the recommendations, like Dan has indicated, they are already used for fixed wireless access, fragmented throughout the country, in various countries. We need to have a strategy of how are we going to clear those bands. We're able to allocate 80 to 100 megahertz to one operator, because currently I do not think most of the countries will be able to do that. And the other thing, when you look at the result of the work which is going to the WRC, we are talking about also getting the 3.6 and 3.8. Would it be advisable to combine those bands so that you have a proper strategy of actually having wider bands which you can actually use them for that? So those are the kind of things which we need to do. And the issue of the type of application, we should not only adopt 5G, for the high-speed broadband. And I think that is one key thing which we need to actually emphasize, to say some of the benefits that can run on 5G. How are we going to actually, as Africa? And I think we can move to my next slide, because I just wanted one of the things which I have noted, that sometimes when we are on the technical side, we do miss the point that these technologies, they are there to enable other sectors. And I think one of the things, if you look at even in the recommendation, they are talking about the various sectors to be enabled. And I just highlighted those. And those sectors, we need to actually have a conversation with them, see what is their need, rather than to allocate the spectrum to say, we have allocated the spectrum, that's when we will engage them. And I think it's very, very important that there is engagement at the start, so that when we design the regulation and the policies, they are well in line with the needs of the sectors which we are going to be dealing. We need a multi-sector coordination, and we need to discuss with those sectors. We can move to the next slide. One of the things which I picked as the main challenges in Africa, and of course, I'm using my country as an example, but I do know that this actually is a trend in most of the countries, and those are some of the challenges which we have. You'll find that most of there is a low fixed broadband penetration, and this is coming from that previous fixed telephony being very low. And we do have that challenge that mobile broadband becomes now the key. Yes, I do know that 5G will assist us in terms of achieving the speed. And the question is, can't we achieve some of those speed using the 4G? Because rather than enhancing that, why don't you ensure that you have the highest penetration in terms of the fixed broadband, and using the fixed wireless technology where possible? The issue of affordable ICT, and this is actually highlighted even in the digital transformation strategies, that we need to address that. And the issue of lagged universal coverage, and that is the main key, that we have in areas where actually you will find that we have network, but when you move to the rural areas, those coverage are not there. And the challenge which I have noted is lack of the skilled manpower. We do have people who are actually, in most of our countries, have high unemployment rate. However, there is still importation of some skills. While we now need to actually say, how do we actually benefit from the rollout of 5G to make sure that we address something within the country? And the other issue, which was also highlighted even digital transformation strategy, and also when you look into the COVID, it has taught us many things, that there is a need for us to start these devices for ourselves. We cannot rely on importing this thing for long. We need to make sure that we develop our manufacturing ICT industry so that we can actually benefit. So we need to actually now starting to see we can address. And that's what I'm actually challenging us is, when we develop these regulations and policies, we now start to think beyond the issue of the market itself. So we can move to the next slide. The issue we wanted to highlight is the issue of poverty and inequality, that sometimes the principles which we apply of market approaches in terms of allocation of spectrum, it does not work. It does not address those issues of inequalities, because it's only the guys who have money who benefiting. Finally, this is my last slide. We need to harmonize our digital transformation strategy with whatever rollout roadmap we develop, and also the issue of engaging the multi-sector sector stakeholders, so that we do make sure that we create a business case for the 5G. Let's not roll out the technologies for the roll out the technology. We have to build the business case, improve the country's competitiveness, so that we can benefit from this. Because I'm looking at countries like Botswana and Kenya, which have big tourisms, to say, how can we use 4G to actually improve our tourism sector in this COVID era, because we are now not getting people coming to say, you know, things like virtual reality, augmented. How can we actually apply 5G in those tourism areas so that we can be international? I think that is my last slide. Thank you, moderator. Be there to interact, to get more and more questions to deal with this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Regulator. I think you really have represented your constituency really well. And if there's any message I get from you, is that this is beyond our sector. This is not an ICT matter. And the other question is there really even an ICT sector? So we need to go and engage all other sectors. We need to discuss our transformation. Yeah, that's why I say at some point we will have to switch from Spectrumese to English. Thank you very much. So, like I said, I mean, it's beyond our sector, and 5G is, even within the sector, it is not standalone. It's not, one cannot do anything on its own. And so the partner, the supporter, the collaborator is other services. So ESOA comes to the aid. We want to reach hard to reach places. We want to partner. Laura has something to tell us about that. So the floor is yours, Laura.
Hello, good morning, and thank you, Elizabeth, and good morning to all the distinguished panelists and participants, and thank you very much to Forum Global for this excellent event and the opportunity to participate. So the title of this session is in relation to an harmonized 5G strategy for Africa, and I would like to expand on the idea of harmonization to start with. A degree of harmonization is key for the deployment of new technologies and for the benefits of good quality connectivity to be enjoyable by all and not just a few. Harmonization should be reflected to the extent possible in the overall regulatory approach and in the deployment approach at regional level. However, I would go a step forward in the interpretation of harmonization, if I may. I think it is clear that 5G will not be deployed using only one technology. And it won't be only terrestrial, and it won't be only satellite. It is therefore essential that the obvious synergy, convergence between satellite and terrestrial is exploited to the best of its potential in an harmonized way. Governments, regulators, and policymakers are, of course, key. They have a key role in making sure that this harmonized approach is feasible for a win-win solution for all involved. If I may move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So another thing that is quite clear, that there has been a huge evolution in satellite systems in recent times. And I would say that in the very last few years, this is not only continuing, but is accelerating. And it's not only the satellites as such, it's the entire satellite ecosystems. For instance, with the developments of flat panel antennas that allow for more efficient, easier to use user terminals, so computing power that allows for very complex systems to be managed that have onboard processing, beam reshaping, beam reporting, beam repointing, and so on. All of these technology for what? The result is, first of all, a massive increase in available capacity, and not only the quantity, is also the flexibility by which this capacity can be delivered. In the most recent systems, we are talking about multiple terabits per second for the system, with user links of multiple gigabits per second. This leads in turn to a transformation in the associated economics. In other words, costs are going down drastically, and therefore affordability is increasing. So overall, satellite technology is available to support 5G development needs in an affordable manner. If we may go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So once again, there is no single technology that can satisfy all telecommunications needs. And this is where the synergy, the complementarity of the different technologies becomes of paramount importance. The complementarity of satellite can be seen at different levels. It can be geographical, so for instance, by providing services where terrestrial can't reach, or can be achieved by providing a portion of the link, for instance, backhauling, or can be for resilience, backup, in the case of overloading or failure in the terrestrial network. So overall, it is clear that satellite is an important part of the 5G ecosystem. But I would go one step further. In order to achieve truly global connectivity, satellite is not only important, but is indispensable as a technically and financially viable solution in rural and remote areas. And this is in relation to any 5G application, from IoT to the connected cars to, once again, backhaul connectivity. In relation to backhaul, I would like to stress some of the benefits that have already been mentioned, especially in the first day. Backhaul via satellite allows for a decreased time to market, lowers the risk on investment, eliminates large infrastructure deployments, and overall allows for the MNOs for revenue generation in new hard-to-reach places. In general, it's of course important that the spectrum that is allocated to satellites that are operating now or are planned to be operated is preserved. This is also because of the overall timelines and financial models involved in satellite planning and overall the operating lifetime of satellites. If we may go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we have already mentioned that satellite can support 5G in all its applications, but let's consider an even broader picture. Ultimately, what is the scope? The scope is for anyone, anything needing being connected to be connected with a quality of connection that is adequate for the intended purpose. Once again, satellites play a unique role either as an integrator to terrestrial networks and or to provide a direct remote access, including for users on mobile platforms. Next slide, please. Thank you. So one last word in terms of benefits. In relation to time to market, satellite is by default the fastest way because of the instantaneous coverage in relation to a rapid rollout of broadband across Africa. However, speed is not everything. So apart also from the reaching capability of satellite, there is also the aspect of resilience, reliability, and security, which is unparalleled. This is even more important for societal and governmental applications where dependability and cyber security is key. And I would mention e-health and emergency responses, also in the case of natural disaster. So I would move now to the concluding slide, if I may. So just a few points as a conclusion. So it is clear, once again, no single technology can satisfy all telecommunication needs. Satellite systems are key enablers of universal connectivity and highly relevant towards an harmonized regional 5G strategy. For this, it's important, of course, that access to the allocated spectrum is preserved. 5G networks, again, should be forward compatible with satellites because, as I already mentioned, this harmonization, this synergy is critical for the overall success of 5G deployment or in general universal connectivity deployment. Amongst other things, satellite will allow for a rapid rollout of broadband across Africa and highly competitive backhauling solution for remote areas. And with this, I wish to thank you all very much for your attention. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Laura. I don't know whether anybody could have said it any better. I think you've covered it. You have demonstrated it. And now we hear from James because, the public out there probably will not be, they could be interested in what we're talking about, but really at the end of the day, when somebody wakes up at home and he wants, or she wants to connect and get a 5G phone and 5G connectivity, she doesn't know us. She doesn't know who is backhauling. She doesn't know who's making the rules, who's making the policies. We just want the phone. We want to connect. We want to speak and enjoy all the things that you tell us. So, James, if you're wearing this shoe, we want to know, is it tight or is it loose? How does it feel? And you have the last word.
All right. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Forum, and thank you, audience. I think you couldn't have put it any better, Elizabeth. I think when all the papers are done, someone has to move the paper to pavement. So we happen to be that Safaricom. Like rightly introduced me, I'm James Maitai, Director Network in Safaricom, and we are proud to have launched 5G as a second country in Africa a few months ago at the beginning of this year. I'll probably want to share our experiences and what you've learned so far, and maybe our plans, and hopefully call to action. And I'm happy that in this forum we have all the stakeholders, especially the regulators. So if I may, I just want to take a minute to just put it to perspective for users who may not be familiar with Safaricom. If you can move to the first slide, I would want to say Safaricom, we have about 30 million subscribers and almost 80% market share in Kenya, of which 18 million are active data users. As you might well know, Safaricom is the home of M-Pesa, so we are very, very proud of this innovation with more than 21 million customers using M-Pesa actively daily, and it contributes to at least 40% of our GDP. In terms of mobile coverage, our country is fully covered, 2G, 3G, and I'm proud to say the last 1 year, we've almost covered the entire population with 4G. So almost every signal you see in Kenya is a 4G signal at 96.8% population coverage. 5G is at initial stage of rollout, and obviously, as you might also have read and heard in the preceding forums, 5G is not just another G on top of the other 2G, 4G, all the other Gs we've had before. 5G is more of a step change from the other evolution. In terms of fiber, we have a good backbone of fiber in Kenya, working with the government on North B, but also more than 10,000 kilometers of fiber of our own, and therefore we are the right place to have 5G. If I would move on to the next things, of a few things we've learned since we launched 5G, is we have 5G as non-standalone at the beginning, meaning it relies on the existing 4G infrastructure. And I think in 2 years' time, we plan to now build a standalone 5G core based on the earnings. I would want to say 5G is very expensive to invest in. It's not cheap. And therefore, we're still working on how to optimize the cost. As it is now, it's 2 to 3 times as expensive. We also see the energy consumption is much higher. That means you also have to go back to the drawing board almost 2 to 3 times and adjust to that. At the moment, the use cases that we have ready is fixed wireless to augment fiber in areas where you don't have fiber, and also enhance mobile broadband. The other key element is we launched it on 40 megahertz of 3.5, and we are also working with the regulator, because like you had before, and I can confirm, you need at least between 80 to 100 megahertz to give proper experience. In terms of device ecosystem, the penetration is low. So again, we have experience in how to push these devices to the market and rely on the government support in terms of trying to make it easier. If I would not move to the next slide, then I would say the use cases that we launched already are fixed mobile, fixed wireless access, but you see a lot of opportunity in learning, virtual learning, as COVID has shown us. We also see opportunity in healthcare, especially remote access and preventive. Other use cases that are relevant to Kenya, and I think one of the speakers before mentioned, and Botswana, is e-tourism. So we are also working with the Ministry of Tourism to see how well we can bring virtual tourism to reality. We've also seen cases of harbor in Kenya. The government has built new harbors, and we see opportunity to automate using 5G. Other future use cases would be on 5G. Gaming is already here, and shopping. If I would go to the last slide, maybe in conclusion, in terms of the next steps and call to action, I would like to say 5G is going to be a catalyst and a key enabler for the fourth industrial revolution. and we see it fueling mobile edge computing, IoT, AI, and robotics. And therefore, the question to the government and the policymakers is not to view 5G licensing and spectrum as a direct source of income, but as an enabler that will drive the digital economy, which then in the end will be the real generation of income. I would also want to say in Kenya, we are happy, and I think my colleague and fellow Kenyan spoke about the North B. So we see the government should come in telco, a national government, to subsidize 5G equipment so that you can have it wide used. The next step, obviously, will be now to bring to life additional use cases, especially the industrial ones and the virtual tourism I spoke about. We also noted from the rest of the countries that if industries can adopt 5G, they can gain at least 40% efficiencies in all their processes, be it manufacturing and any other internal processes. Then finally, I would want to say, as Safaricom, we are committed to, our purpose is transforming life and working within our Kenyan national broadband strategy, which 5G fits very well, and ICT policy 2019, where we talk of digital economy with 5G first. We see this as the next step. So our next step in Safaricom now, of course, will be now to continue rolling out to the rest of the country. But like I said, it's not going to be another 5G. So the 5G rollout will be mainly need-driven. We have niche markets that we'll also be targeting, but the key focus will be the other big cities in the country. Thank you.
So for me, before Dan put me on there, I was saying, wow. Why would I say that, James? So for many years, we've had conferences, we've had discussions, we've had consultations, and we have talked about 5G and its implications and its applicability in Africa. In my experience, this is the first time I have ever heard a presentation from an operator in Africa talking about the experiences they've had, even if it is early days, the experiences you've had with the technology, the nuances that come with its implementation, including how, what you feel about it. The things you've told us today is a first for me and a first for many people. And I think this is really useful because from now we can start discussing this matter from a tangible perspective. So for me personally, and I think for many in the audience, we really thank you for that, and we look forward to much more. And I think it's now time to bring up all the other panelists. I'm actually very excited to have this conversation because it's now the question and answer time. It's the reaction from the audience. I expect us to see lots. Let me see. I think we're going to get lots of questions, but let me see. Maybe I'll start with one as we warm up, as I get to read. I'll just start with a warm up one, which is like coming up from you, James, actually. It's like, okay, the current spectrum assignment methods that we have, where the regulators, calculate the number of megahertz and then they auction 20 megahertz for so much. So I want to ask the regulatory constituency here with represented by Choganetsu. Do you think this current spectrum assignment methods, which auctions 2 megahertz or 5 or 2 by 5, is it going to be applicable to the 80 or 100 megahertz that's going to be required in this for 5G? So I'll start with you with that question while I read the others.
Thank you, moderator. And I think that is the main question which we are facing with regard to as a regulator, because I think the first action which we indicated earlier on is to be able to clear and make those amount of spectrum, 80 to 100 megahertz, to be available so that it can be released. But now the next question which comes into place is, like the James has just presented on, the issue of the is when, for example, do you actually give the spectrum to the operator and let him to go and commercially negotiate? Take a position as a government to say, this is the sector which I want to promote. For example, if you take Botswana, we have a big mining industry. Is that spectrum to say, you know what, I want to improve the efficiency in the mining industry. I'm releasing this amount of spectrum, which means that now is the discussion with the mining operator, and he now looks for a service provider who can come and roll out that service for him. So that is why I'm actually saying, let's not have only one method of releasing the spectrum. Let's be open that in certain instances, you have to make a decision based on the policy discussions of the country, how you want to. We talked about the tourism industry. As a government, if you have a policy to say, I want to promote the tourism sector, I'm going to give this spectrum because I want to do the following. Now you start from that angle rather than starting from the angle of constructing the network and looking for the consumers, because here you are now facilitating. When I talked about the facilitation of digital transformation, we need to use this spectrum to facilitate the country digital transformation rather than to use it only for the purpose of the commercial. It's not about generating the money from the spectrum. It's about using the spectrum for the benefit of the country. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. So I see we still have Dan Obama with us. I understand he may leave us, so I'm going to start with him as a policymaker. So the recommendations talk of 2 priority bands, and the question is, what are your comments on the choice of bands? Where you sit as a policymaker, and maybe you weren't so involved. What are your comments? Are there other priority bands? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth, and a fellow panelist. Yes, I think the priority bands are a bit narrow, and as I made in my introductory remarks, that band is very, very much fragmented. So I would suggest that maybe countries, as we accept the recommendations, we also look at other bands. There is the 2.5 to 2.690. There's 190 megahertz there. Other countries, I know not in Africa, are actually deploying some form of 5G there. We have a 2.3, 2.4. We have the bands that are currently being used for the 2G and 3G. Refarming could be also one aspect. The other aspect would be that as we go into WRC 23, there is these studies which are going to be carried out for compatibility and possible identification of 3.6, 3.8 for IMT. So I hope that as we go forward, the recommendation, the bands, the number of bands will increase. So, and of course, millimeter waves are there. If we are going to talk about verticals, campuses, port operations, airport operations, perhaps we need to look at other bands other than the C band that is already identified. Thank you.
And James, I mean, you're like the person here. So what are your thoughts about the bands? If it was all up to you, and in Kenya the airways were all free, which one would you pick as your priority?
Yeah, obviously, like I said, we've picked 3.5 for now, and there are certain reasons for that. Of course, the best would have been the road band, the 700, 800, simply because it's cheaper to cover the country, but you simply can't get enough bandwidth to provide the right 5G experience. And therefore, those ones would be much later for massive machine-to-machine kind of communication. But for now, we've used 3.5 because, number one, it's possible to get at least 80 to 100 megahertz there. But also, in terms of ITU zone where we are, and also the vendors, manufacturers, is very common, being used in more than 48% of the commercial networks. And therefore, it means getting the equipment the BTS and the telco equipment is easier. Getting the device to the customer, which is the most difficult part, is the device, the customer's device terminals. Given our people are not as rich as Europe, and therefore you have to use what is common and what you can find the right device and also the right equipment. Obviously, millimeter wave would be good because it has a lot of bandwidth, but it's also extremely expensive because you have to do so many sites to cover the people. So that would mainly be used on niche markets, like targeted verticals, industries, but you don't see that being used on national rollout. So using looking at the three band, the low band, mid band, and high, the most optimal and practical for a user like us is therefore the 3.5.
Okay, so I'm going to, there's one from YouTube here. I'm just going to read it. Africa needs and challenges for 5G are completely unique. We cannot simply follow approaches seen in other regions. The focus has got to be on closing the digital divide and getting connectivity to the unconnected. How can this goal be matched with goals for 5G rollout? And, that's general for all of you and maybe even for our rapporteur as well, because he saw the conversations that were taking place that generated the recommendations. That's an open question to the whole panel, as you wish.
In this case, maybe Elizabeth, may I start by providing a point of view? Thank you very much. I think that's a very good question, and I believe I was trying to tackle this question already in the presentation from ESOA, in the sense that it's clear that the priority is universal connectivity, especially in Africa. And for that, for the specific challenges in the continent, it is once again essential to exploit all the different technologies in a way that it makes sense financially and technically. So again, it will be a challenge also in this harmonization of the different technologies. Can be fiber, can be fixed wireless, can be mobile wireless. And once again, satellite are bound to play a key role because terrestrial will not be able in a financially sensible manner to reach everywhere. So thank you once again for the question.
Thank you.
If I may, I would like to add a practical angle because in the end, we are the wearer of the shoe. What I would like to say is most of the user needs can be served by 4G for sure. And I think from our experience, you have 4G in the entire country. We also have a very big footprint of fiber. However, I agree with the questioner here there because we cannot use what has been used in the first world and other places. We have to define our own path. And like Lola was saying, it has to be a mix of technologies. So I see 5G as an upside because the areas where we will never make, unlike other countries which invested in copper, for their fixed wire, for fixed connectivity and even fiber, for us, we have a chance to skip that step and just go straight to 5G to provide that broadband connectivity, which could be an upside because you wouldn't have to go through a lot of fiber. So the areas where it may never make sense to put fiber, but 5G is ready and can augment and complement and co-evolve with 4G.
Moderator.
Elizabeth, if I may. Oh, okay. Capelletto, you go first.
Please. You're on mute. Capelletto, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. No, I just wanted to add that really it's very, very important that, like the question just indicated, we need to make sure that we develop the policies which are appropriate for us, rather than just to implement the policies which are coming from different areas. And James has just touched on a very good point because, on the spectrum allocation, I used to get operators I need this spectrum, and when I ask them to say, what do you need it for? No, it's good. Yes. But the first thing he does, he put the base station in Gaborone. And I asked him, is Gaborone a rural area? Those are some of the things which does happen that, because if we're to be right now taking the 5G user cases, saying there are areas where we can not roll out the fiber, where instead of us actually waiting for the fiber to go there, we deploy 5G for broadband connectivity so that we offer them the highest. Those are the things where you see the benefit. But you'll find that people, when they take the spectrum, they are going to deploy it in an area where it's have a high fixed broadband fiber, which means that you are basically complementing what is already there. So, the most important thing is let's use 5G to address our problem rather than to actually just for the sake of deploying the technology. Because like you indicated, it's very costly, but in the long run, this cost will be passed to the issue of the consumers, which we have not touched more about it, because the issue is a major concern in our region. And I think most of the economists, you can see that they are going through the tough time with this COVID. We need to find a mechanism of reducing the cost of providing the service as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. And
Dan? If I may weigh in, I do agree with Laura that, and for us in Kenya, our policies are normally, first of all, technology neutral, and we advocate for a mix of technologies. I'll give an example. If I have a mining operation in some remote part of Kenya, and we need to give them connectivity, by the time you lay fiber to that place, it will be very expensive. So satellite becomes an obvious solution to that, although maybe the access network, maybe a 5G network. So I think the integration of the different sort of technologies, satellite, terrestrial, to offer solutions. Because at the end of the day, what we want is to transform our economy digitally, offer jobs to our youth. And if satellite offers this, we go ahead with this. Two, on the issue of bringing ideas from outside, the issue of harmonization is very important. Let's not lose sight of that. So you may not want to discard experiences from elsewhere. The reason why mobile has worked very well in the continent is because we saw what was happening with GSM in Europe, and we had a big problem with the fixed network. Elizabeth knows this very well. There was always a 25-year waiting period to be connected by phone. Mobile came and just took that away in less than 20 years. So it is good to learn from others and learn from their mistakes, and then you tweak it to suit your situation. So if you have a unique problem, you can take a solution from somewhere and tweak it instead of reinventing the wheel, as the English say. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments? Maybe I could just add, and again, as Mohammed will recall, during the conversations, this whole fixed wireless access became a real sticking point. And I wonder, James, being someone who has experienced it, are you seeing this as maybe what was not foreseen as one of the, maybe the I don't want to use the word killer app, but what have you experienced with fixed wireless access, opening up the areas that hitherto would not have been able to get connectivity?
Yeah, so I would want to say fixed wireless access was not fully appreciated, I think, until COVID struck and people started working from home. That's the time people realized how inadequate the kind of broadband access we have. And at Safaricom, just talking from my experience, because I'm also in charge of our fixed network, we could not meet the demand. Even as we speak today, we can't roll out fiber fast enough to cover the demand for our customers. So this, like you say, is a killer app, and I think it's one that can make it cheaper for 5G to be easily and quickly adopted. Because the beauty of 5G is if you have a use case like fixed wireless access, then on top of that, you can now add to enhance mobile broadband using terminals, because getting the devices to use on 5G, my phone, my iPhone, is a slow burner, and it will take time before you get a critical mass. So I see it as an upside that will make it easier to adopt 5G, unlike 4G, where everything was based on mobile usage, as a single customer, and therefore relying on device penetration. So if we can find a way of mixing the fixed wireless access, which we are doing here internally, in areas where we know we not do fiber, and then at the same time trying to push for the device, because device take time and 5G devices are not going to be cheap. And I'm sure from Qualcomm, from the cost of the chip, then to me it might actually make it easier for us to adopt 5G than initially would have thought, but fixed wireless access is going to be key.
Thank you. So I'm looking at the clock, and the questions are coming fast and furious. I'm just going to read one more. One question to the regulators: does the panel agree a mix of technologies and a balanced approach is needed? If so, by looking at C-band for mobile, this would impact satellite services. So what's the win-win solution? Hold on to that. I'm going to read 3 at a go, and because of time. Then another one says, an operator is requesting and insisting to be assigned 3.7 to 3.8 gigahertz and does not want even the 3.5 gigahertz that James so highly recommends. What is so special about 3.7 to 3.8? We have like, so anyone want to take one of those questions in a minute? There's so many questions. Anybody?
Well, let me start by the first one, the issue of mixed technology. I think we do agree that you cannot use only one technology. There has to be a mix-up. However, the mechanism of sharing, that the reason why actually it was 3.4 to 3.6, maybe 3.6 to 3.8, was to leave certain other bands also for the C-band to be utilized, because it was to say, you know what, we cannot take the whole of the C-band. I know that, we did have some battle. I did this agenda item in the various WC conference where, it was night discussions to reach a common agreement. But that's why I say take the whole of the C-band. We are saying take part of the C-band so that it can be utilized for the 5G mobile networks, and we leave the other portion for the satellite. But I know there are agenda items which want to take all, but those are the things. With regard to the other item, I think I'm not sure, because this is a scenario in another country. But my thinking is because the lower band of 3.5, it may be fragmented with the fixed wireless access. That's why the guy is looking for 3.7 and 3.8, because he knows now he does not have much of the fixed WS access, so he can get a wider bandwidth. That is my thinking, but I'm not sure because it's a situation. But my suggestion is, the reason why maybe he doesn't want the law is he knows that it's being used for other services. There will be an issue of migration. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. The 3.4 to 3.6 is already identified for IMT by WRC. So it's available, you can use it. 3.6 to 3.8 is not yet identified for IMT. Yeah, so it's a subject of discussion at the next radio conference. So it's important that we participate in the studies and submit information, and especially at each country level. We need to know how these bands are being used. You may insist to be given the spectrum, but it may not be useful. Again, I'm going to my earlier contribution that the usability is important. Insisting to have the spectrum is one thing, but once you get it, it may be very expensive. Maybe you have a lot of satellite systems there. Maybe you don't have anything at all. I think evidence-based decision-making is important in this respect, that each country, each regulator submits information about the usage of these bands so that the conference can make a solid decision based on facts from each of the countries. Like if each African country can submit information, say, to the Africa Telecom Union, so that we can rally around those results which are factual based on actual data from each country. That would be very useful. And then now we can say whether we would like 3.5 when we defragmented it, or we want 3.8 when the WRC agrees that this band can be used for IMT. Thank you.
Okay, so I promise you the questions are many, they're furious. I promise the audience that we will answer each and every single one of the questions that are on the chat. But now we're into our last 5 minutes, the time where we all begin to speak English. And my question to each one of you, give me one follow-on action from this session that we can all take to to take this from a conversation to a deliverable. So starting with, I'm going to start with the policymaker. 1, action.
Let me just go back to what we did before the digital dividend too. We started a conversation way before the decision was made in WRC 15 on the 700 megahertz band. And we brought, many people were involved, Kapeletse, Elizabeth and others. We brought ministers, regulators, industry together to talk about the digital dividend too and how it was going to be used after the migration from analog to digital. So after the decision of 2015, the band was, some countries quickly allocated it to mobile. So we need to take the recommendations and start a conversation of converting the recommendations into actual practical allocation of this spectrum to MNOs, so that we can give ourselves a time frame of 3 years. So by that time, we will have actually done recommendation 1 to 5. But we need a further conversation with our ministers, with our regulators and our industries as an African forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Regulator, one thing we need to do.
I think one thing which I will emphasize is consultation with the stakeholders. And my suggestion here is the user cases we have, let's engage other relevant ministries so that they know the benefit which they can benefit from the 5G, because it will help us get in the necessary buy-in when we actually implement the 5G and people will now start realizing the importance. Yes, I think Dennis already talked the issue of the time frame, but from my side is, I think from our side, the IT sector side or the ICT sector side, let's engage, because, for example, the Ministry of Health may not even know about the benefit which they can get from 5G in terms of the health. We need to engage them so that, they become aware about what is available and how they can use it, the technologies which is available. So to me, one of the things which I put forward is the multi-sector engagement or in 5G implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Collaborator and partner, ESOA.
Thank you. So first of all, I think that the task group, the ATU task group on emerging technologies did a wonderful work and coming up with recommendations. Now the next obvious step is implementation of of the relevant recommendations in consultation with stakeholders. And I may remind that the recommendations were not only for 5G IMT, but there are also recommendations for satellite systems in terms of blanket licensing and free circulation, all towards facilitation of deployment of services to the users. Thank you.
And the shoe wearer, 1 minute, because we have to have 1 minute left for the
yeah.
Yes.
So I'll not talk on anything about policy and spectrum. I think that has been spoken of. The one thing I would like to talk about is the government being involved in bringing stakeholders together to identify national use cases. For example, in my country, virtual tourism is a low-hanging fruit. Develop it further in something that is meaningful and can add value and solve real problems for our people. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Rapporteur of the Emerging Technologies, Engineer Omer, last word from you. Okay. All right. So I think I'm told by Dan we are out of time. I think my recommendation is we continue the conversation.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. I just would like to add that that's consultation between the regulator and operators in
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I think the consultation between regulators and operator is very necessary in order to determine the appropriate approach of licensing, the fees, and the need for a spectrum. I see that when we start negotiation with, for example, with some satellite provider, ask them about the amount of C-band that they use, we discover that they are so light bandwidth cannot be used or can be switched to another satellite, so the opening dialogue between the regulator and the regulator and the operator is very important in order to solve a lot of issues that we didn't used to do this in the past, but it is a new approach, and we should consider this. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. So thank you, everybody. To be continued. Over to you, Dan.
To be continued indeed, and a fascinating discussion. So Elizabeth, thank you so much for expertly moderating that panel, and thank you to Mohammed and to our panelists for a fascinating discussion. So really enjoyed that, and I think from the number of questions and comments that were coming in from the audience shows that the feeling was mutual there. I think everyone found that really useful. So as Elizabeth says, to be continued, I'm sure. But thank you all very much, and thank you to everyone out there for all of your comments and all the contributions that you made to the session as well. So we're now moving on to our next set of showcase.
He's wrapping up on the final remarks, and then we'll get going.
James,
in the next 5 minutes. So I'll bring you down, and then Dan will be in the studio. Then we will swap over, and you'll speak to him, and then we'll get going in the next 5 minutes, if that's okay with you guys.
I don't know what's happening there. Sorry, we can hear my colleague James in the background. So apologies for that. So I don't know what quite's happening there. But anyway, we've got 3 showcase sessions running now. So we've got showcase session 1, showcase session 2, and showcase session 3. So on the first stage, we have a session which is hosted by GSMA, which is focusing on greater access to mobile broadband in sub-Saharan Africa, insights on spectrum needs and pricing. Showcase stage 2, we have a session which is hosted by Facebook, focusing on Telegraph, delivering fiber-like speeds at a fraction of the costs. And on showcase stage 3, we have the showcase which actually we had to postpone yesterday because of technical difficulties, so we're going to be trying again today. So we have a session hosted by ASOA, looking at the transformative impact of satellite. So those are about to start now over on the showcase stages, so please do make your way over to those. And then we are then back here at 1:30 Central African time for our next session here on the main stage, which is going to be focusing on millimeter wave. So thank you very much, everybody. Please do make your way over to the showcase sessions now, and we'll see you there shortly. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Sorry, we're a little bit late. Nice to meet you all. I'm Dan.
Hi, Dan.
Hi. Good to meet you all. Just going to get James to change the